Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Tim Van Orden, and this is episode 15, Unification. We'll be starting off with some Star Trek news and then discussing Discovery Season 3, Episode 7, Unification III.
And then we'll get into our audience question right after our main story, continuing our discussion of the Unification trilogy, Unification I and II from the Next Generation, and talking about peacemaking and reconciliation. We hope you'll enjoy it. Hang around.
So how was your holidays?
Oh,
We just had Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving was good. We gave
The
much
US.
thanks.
Yes.
The cooking was primarily done by myself and my son. And so that was fantastic. He's 11 and did a lot of chopping and helping with various things. And that was cool.
Gosh, he's 11?
He's 11, sir.
Dude.
I know.
Before you know it, he's going to be driving and then going off to college.
Yep. That's what they tell me. They tell me that happens.
Hopefully.
Yeah. How was yours?
My kid? I don't have a kid.
No, your Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving's good. It was
And you
good.
have cats.
Had a little bit of family over and just... Oh, yeah, we've got cat. We've got fur babies.
Yeah.
Yep, they're
That's
doing good.
That's awesome. I'm sure everybody wants to hear all of this.
Oh, you know they do.
You know they do.
If you're a Star Trek fan, I think you've got to be at least part cat person.
That's true.
There's so many cats in the history of Star Trek. Far more cats than there are dogs.
That's true. There are 3 significant cats that I can think of and only 1 significant dog.
There's a dog?
Number 1 on Picard. His pit bull.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Who I wish was in more episodes, honestly. That was my biggest disappointment with Picard. Because that's a sweet little dog. Anyway, so, are we going to... I think we should maybe, start the podcast in earnest. You want to do some Star Trek news?
Sure, I was just trying to kind of get into it, but yeah, let's do it.
Well, I thought we did get into it. Well, yeah.
I've got some exciting news.
Okay.
The Delta Flyers podcast, the most recent episode, had Kate Mulgrew on it as they all discussed Threshold.
Oh,
Because they're doing an episode by episode audio commentary almost type thing.
Really?
Yeah, and they finally
that
made
sounds
it to
familiar.
Threshold, and they had Kate Mulgrew on for it.
Wow. They had Kate and they had a couple other people. I think Garrett Wang was on there, and I think
Garrett
Robert
Wang is always on there. As is Garrett
'cause
Wang and Robert Duncan McNeil.
It's Garrett and Robert's
are the hosts.
podcast. That's
Yes.
right. Man, I should listen to that. I'd forgotten
should.
about that podcast. Oh man. Well, there's another podcast called Shuttle Pod 1 that is a trekmovie.com podcast. Again, hashtag not Spawn. We talk about them so much. But they just did an episode on Voyager's 25th anniversary, which is what we're celebrating this year right now. 25th anniversary of Voyager, if you can believe it.
Man, and there's only
pretty
like
amazing.
a month left.
Yeah, I know, right? Voyager is now as old as the original series was when we were kids.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because the best time to be a Star Trek fan before now was probably during the 25th anniversary around 1991. And that's when we were budding Star Trek fans. And so, Yep.
Fascinating.
That's crazy. Fascinating. Yep. You can't see my eyebrow raising, but it did. It didn't actually, but I can say that because nobody can see my eyebrows. Anyway.
Can you not raise a single eyebrow?
I can. I just didn't right then.
Oh, I see.
Because I didn't have to, because nobody's watching me. But now it's become a whole thing, and I can't. Now I'm doing it. I probably look more like Stephen Colbert than Spock, but I am doing it. But anyway. And also, cool thing. I'm going to put a link in the description to a video that a friend of mine shared about some warp drive news that came out a couple of weeks ago. Or the video came out recently, but there was a paper published a couple of weeks ago that is an advancement in understanding or working toward warp drive. And in the video, I haven't seen all of it yet because it's very sciencey and cool, and I just haven't been able to sit down and look at it. But in the video, the person talks all about all the principles involved in warp drive and everything. So those of you who really geek out on that stuff like I do, it'll be fun to watch. So that'll be in the description. So there you go. Yeah.
Cool beans.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, and there was one other piece of news you were telling me about earlier, right?
Yeah, I guess it is. I guess it is a piece of news. If you are one of these folks who does not get the newsletter, which you can sign up for at gospelaccordingtostartrek.com or kevincneese.com, or does not follow us on Twitter at Gospel According to Star Trek or Kevin C. Neese, or Facebook on Gospel According to Star Trek, if you're not one of those people, you might not know, or that there was an extra bonus episode of the podcast. Well, today when we're recording, but this Sunday, the first Sunday in Advent, I started a new series of mini episodes. The first one's 12 minutes long, and they are Advent devotions that are centered around Star Trek. It's something very similar to somewhat similar to what I tried to do on the blog a few years back, and I never really felt like it worked the way I wanted to on the blog. And this was really this was an opportunity for me to do something that's a little different from what we do on the podcast normally. Kind of a sacred space, a little quiet moment to reflect on Advent in a nerdy Star Trek kind of way. So, yeah.
And it was I got to listen to it before it came out. It was very good. It was very moving, and I really enjoyed it.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
So yeah,
and I hope the audience. Yeah, and I hope everybody likes it. And I'll be doing it every Sunday in Advent. And yeah, and I think I'm going to do one on Christmas Day too. I don't know. We always did that in my church. We had that tradition because we'd have a Christmas Eve service, and that's when we'd light like the final candle and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, why not? So there you go.
Cool.
All right. Should we now what? Should we get into the discussion
let's
here?
Let's get into the discussion. Let's discover the episode.
Unification Part 3.
No, there is no part to it.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Unification 3.
I actually corrected you on that at the beginning of this episode.
You made me re-record that intro.
Unification 3, or as some might call it, Unification III. I was waiting for you to do that. Yeah. So how'd you find it?
Not bad.
One of these days.
It's almost become a tradition at this point. I kind of have to.
It has. It's just.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. There were a couple of parts during the episode where I'm like, I bet Kevin is crying to this.
Oh, you were probably right. Which parts?
The first one was when I almost cried. When she was watching the Spock holo recording.
That was so sweet.
That one really had me. I was getting a little misty-eyed there.
Yeah. I mean, even though it's again that thing that we've seen, which I guess exists as 24th century technology, that I guess everything our characters ever do is somehow recorded on video.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make any logical sense for that to be there, but we've had plenty of instances like that within Next Generation itself. So,
well, I mean, you got to figure the computer is always listening, right?
That's true.
Because it's got to be just like Alexa or those sort of things. So it's always listening, and it's got their physical attributes on file for holographic reproductions. So even if it didn't visually record him saying it, it shouldn't be a problem with their hologram technology to recreate it based on the audio recordings of the ship listening in on every single conversation all over the ship. Which would be
a great retcon if they weren't in a cave on Romulus.
The comm badges.
The comm badges. That's a stretch. But I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I've been known, like when something special is happening, like my son is saying something cool or whatever, I'll just kind of pull my phone out and hit record.
Yeah.
Just because this isn't happening again. I better record it. So, maybe Jean-Luc sort of surreptitiously did that.
Or Data did. Was Data there? I didn't actually watch
Data was not there.
Okay.
Data was further back in the cavern.
Yeah, but he's got good hearing, right?
Not that good. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, no, that was a really sweet moment. That was awesome. I think Sonequa played it beautifully. I think in fact, I saw something on Twitter that was like, yeah, Sonequa's face in this moment is all of us watching this moment, you know? It's just like, yeah, it was pretty great. Yeah. So what other parts did you think I was probably tearing up at?
Right now I can't remember.
Oh, well, that's anticlimactic.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Yeah, anyway, that's all right. But yeah, I mean, so like, the tie-in with Picard of the Romulan.
Yeah, I'm not going to say the name of the group right.
The Romulan warrior nuns.
The Way of Candor. And let me just say, I love that. Like, we haven't gotten much into Picard, but I love the Way of Candor.
Yes.
I think it's a very awesome way for the Romulan culture to kind of branch out in a different direction.
Yes.
Like and even as the Vulcans, as she was describing it, the president or the chancellor,
president
was saying, you know, it was like a natural outgrowth of a society that speaks in lies and hides things all the time.
Right.
I really like the Way of Candor as a concept for the Romulans.
I think that's really cool, and I think it for me kind of echoes the Christian discipline of confession. We've talked about this a little bit before, but you know, as a Protestant, and everybody that I communicate with who listens to the podcast is a Protestant. If you're Catholic and you're listening to the show, please drop me a line, because I would love to hear a Catholic perspective on what we're doing.
And if you're a Calvinist, you already know if you're going to drop us a line.
Well, you don't know, but God does.
Right.
But anyway, what was I saying? But I think I do feel that this one thing as a Protestant that I have always had to sort of work at and think about is confession, and how we do confession, and whether we do confession as Protestants. Because usually we don't really. In all honesty, Protestants are pretty darn bad at confession.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole verse in the Bible about confessing your sins before other people.
Yeah.
And like the closest we get to it is saying, "Yep, I'm a sinner."
Right, absolutely. It's just this sort of generalized, and you hear it like in Christian music and stuff. It's like these sort of there's music that actually confronts things and really is confessional and talks about literal struggles. And then there's music that is kind of, air quotes, uplifting and will mention that.
Right.
You know, but in a very glossy way, in a very like, let's just glance off the missing the mark kind of way. And there's a huge difference in that. And I feel like that's something that evangelical Christian culture, at least, is missing out on, is that candor, that honesty, not only with one another, but with ourselves. Again, not in a hurtful way, not in a vengeful way, but in a for the sake of our souls and for the sake of our relationships. I think it can be very important.
Yeah, I feel like when you're acknowledging your sin to yourself, it's really easy to kind of give lip service to the whole giving your sins to God, but when you're actually telling them to someone else, verbalizing them, saying them out loud, you're brought face to face with them, you know, and there's a lot more authenticity to it, I think.
And this is something that I've encountered even recently in my life. When I'm having a struggle, I'm dealing with something, I'm going through emotions or kind of thought cycles that are really easy for me to try to dismiss and stick away and say, well, that's not important. You know, like I shouldn't get caught up in that. That's selfish or whatever. But then when I have a trusted friend and I say to them, hey, I'm going through this and I don't know what to do about it. and talk to them about the situation. Like, yeah, there's really no solution. I don't know how to kind of meet this need or heal this wound or whatever, or process this feeling. I notice that just saying that to another person, it helps.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make the thing go away, but it helps me to not feel so overwhelmed by it, helps me to not be so arrested about it, and helps me to not feel so alone about it. And so I feel like a big problem in contemporary Christian culture, especially I can speak to evangelical culture because that's where I come from, is that we aren't honest about our struggles, and we aren't honest enough to share them openly, at least with one person, and so I think that creates a dishonesty with ourselves, and that causes a lot of people to be very afraid of sharing their real selves with the people in their families, with the people in their churches, with the people in their communities.
And you know what else I think it does? I think this is kind of the root of a lot of the exclusion that we see with the church. Is they latch on to these quote unquote bigger sins that are more visible, where they say this is wrong, and they really push on that as a way of kind of burying their own.
I think that's probably often true. Like I think a lot of times when we busy ourselves accusing others and ostracizing others and pushing others out, I think we're often doing that consciously or unconsciously in a sort of self-defensive manner. As long as we can point to another who is worse than us,
right,
then we don't have to look at our own problems,
right,
and our own issues. And there's really a thing,
which is exactly the opposite of what the scripture says.
Right, exactly. And there's really a thing, I think, in Christian culture that everybody, and I think this particularly falls on pastors, but I think it kind of moves down the river to everybody else. There's a sense that we all kind of have to be perfect, and put on a really nice face, and I think it's unhealthy. It's very, very unhealthy. We can create a positive and an uplifting atmosphere for one another that is also honest about our failures. That is possible. I've seen it. I've seen it in churches. I'm not, not anti-church. Just, just saying, it can be done right. It can be done well. But yeah. So,
and
I like that.
To bring that back to the episode,
thank you.
This is exactly what happens at the end with Burnham when her mother forces her to confess, to say out loud in front of everybody what's going on with her, why she's feeling the way she is. It allows Michael to confront these feelings and really come to terms with them.
Yes.
And I really liked that moment. It was a little predictable that it was coming when her mother did this. You could see where she was going with it, and it was kind of like, okay, Michael, you got to know where she's going with this. But it was still a very nice moment nonetheless.
It was, and I think we can recognize that moment because it is so universal. But more than one person has latched on to what you said in the previous episode. Who I've conversed with, more than one person has latched on to what you said in the previous episode that about Michael saying vulnerability is not a weakness, and I was reminded that the actual line in the show is vulnerability is not a death sentence. Which I think, but still, I mean, the idea carries, but I think about that vulnerability is not a death sentence, maybe even is a stronger way of saying that you're even more frightened of vulnerability because you really do see it like a death sentence. You really do see it like it's going to, end everything for you.
Right.
And so the stakes are a little higher. But one way or another, it's interesting to see Burnham say that in one episode, and in the next episode, see her rattled. I mean, just really rattled. To I don't want to say to her core, but pretty heavily rattled to be confronted with vulnerability or the possibility, the potential of being vulnerable in a public space, in a space where she feels like she has to prove herself, which is what she always does, right? She's such an achiever. She's always, partially because of growing up in Vulcan culture as a human and having to meet those high standards, right? But also, I mean, she's pushed herself all through her Starfleet career and everything. And so to be in a situation where she's being examined and to say, yeah, I've failed and I've screwed up and I haven't held true to what I've said I wanted to. My motivations aren't always pure. But then to come around and say, but darn it, we've gotten the job done.
Right.
I think that was really, really, really good for her and really healing for her. And her mom knew that. I really, really loved seeing that. And the thing that was brought out to me too about that discussion of vulnerability and weakness is that the scriptures say that when I am weak, right, then I am made strong. And I think that strength in weakness, or that strength through weakness, is absolutely what we see in that moment with Michael. I think it's a beautiful moment of vulnerability, not only not being a death sentence, but being the key. It's like, because she's more vulnerable, which could be seen as weakness, right? Because she admits her weaknesses,
right?
She's actually made more strong. And I think that's true over and over and over in life. We see people in public life who never want to show any weakness. And the more they front and the more they give all this bluster, the weaker and more pathetic they look. Because we can all see.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, we can all see that they have major issues, but then they're talking like they don't. And you see this over and over and over. Organizations get called on something and they try to cover it up like it never happened, and it's just so obvious and everybody can see it. And the more they cover up, the lower people's estimation of them becomes and the weaker they become, because they're not being truthful. And the truth will set you free. There's scripture again. So.
Yep. But more geeking out about Discovery. We're halfway through this Discovery segment.
Yes.
What did you think of Tilly getting? I mean, we both were kind of like,
yes.
From the rank position, we didn't think it would be Tilly, but from the personnel, from the personal relationship angle, she was the natural choice. Yep. Were you excited to see that she got it?
I was really excited because that's honestly what the heart wanted, right? Because we love Tilly. and she, she's in the command training program and all of that. So we know the potential Saru sees in her, and it's really, it's the best next step in sort of his tutelage of her to give her that position. But she's still an ensign. And I love the way Kirsten Beyer wrote this episode. And of course, Kirsten is one of the people whose names made me excited about Discovery in the beginning, because I knew she was a respected author of the novels. And this episode, we'll get onto that in a second. The relationship between this episode and novels. Don't let me get off of that.
Oh, okay.
But in this, in giving Tilly the first officer position, I feel like it was written in such a way that, Tilly's as shocked as we are. But I think Saru made the right choice, because ultimately, rank or not, what matters most on Discovery as a ship, right, and as a crew, what matters most is relationship. I really think that's true of this crew. I don't want to say above any other, but almost above any other. It's really about personal relationship. I mean, in a broad spectrum. It's not just like that core triumvirate like Spock, McCoy, and Kirk. It's the whole crew. And so when Sylvia goes down to engineering and everybody's standing there, and they all say yes, it reminded me of that moment around the table with Saru, where he says, we can think of this like a prayer. You can all say what you said when we chose to make this journey, and they all go around the table and say I. And it's the same thing. Say yes, say yes, say yes, say yes. It's like that sort of communal, prayerful almost ordination or blessing moment, for Tilly, and what a beautiful scene. And I'm excited as heck. I don't know, like some of the sticklers might be like, no, there's no way an ensign can be first officer. I mean, I know I said that, but you know what? I don't care, because it is the right thing from a writing perspective and from a character perspective, and I'm excited about it. Sorry, I ramble on way too long.
No,
about that. Go ahead.
we're geeking out about Discovery. It's what we're supposed to do.
Your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, it's cool.
I'm over here feeling so guilty that I'm not letting you talk, and then you're like, 4 syllables. We're good.
3.
3. You're right. Sorry. Oversell it.
If I were really smart, I would have come up with a haiku.
Haiku. That would be awesome.
No, I really did. I was sitting there. I was mixed feelings, if I'm being perfectly honest, because there is that part of me that's like, an ensign can't be the first officer. But
bang on.
But yeah, I'm curious to see where it goes. I am definitely willing to stay open to the idea. I'm excited for her. I definitely like the partnership that Saru and Tilly have. And I mean, she's got to become... from the Mirror universe that she's got that command streak in her. So,
right.
So yeah, no, I'm very curious to see where this goes.
Me too. And it's interesting because it is a temporary appointment.
Right. Yeah, that's what I want to know how they're going to handle that. Are they just going to leave her at the temporary position for the rest of the show and kind of not address it again? Or are they going to get to a point where they're like, okay, you're done now. We're going to put Michael back in.
Yep. We don't know. We really don't know. Because that's kind of the thing. Like, as much as there's this close bond between Saru and Sylvia, there's also a close bond between Saru and Michael. Mm-hmm. And it's and both of them, it's that tutelage, relationship. It's that mentor relationship. And you want both of them to bring forth all the blessing they can, and so it leaves me, anyway, as an audience member, a little torn about how I want things to end up. Mm-hmm. But of course, what I want is irrelevant, and it's I trust the people making Star Trek right now, really trust them, and I think it's going to be beautiful whatever happens. So I'm looking forward to it.
So I want to ask you your opinion about something with Discovery. Mm-hmm. And this episode, I think, really kind of highlighted it. There's been some observations that they're really cramming in a lot of, I guess, what I would call like the hallmark emotional moments. Like every 5 minutes, every time you turn around, there's this deep, profound, people are just pouring out their soul moments, it seems. Does it feel that way to you? Like they're really just dumping out there so much?
We've talked before about the emotional vulnerability or the emotional availability of people in this iteration of Star Trek. Mm-hmm. And I really like it. I have never felt that it was gimmicky. I have never felt that it was cheap. In fact, I feel a little relieved that Star Trek is paying more attention to the emotional side of their characters. Not that it hasn't had it before, but like you said, there's a lot of more kind of profound moments. People are working through things for multiple episodes. In some ways more than they have in other series. At least it's rivaled by Deep Space Nine. And so I like that, because I think sometimes it can feel a little emotionally dishonest that we behave as though these major things these people go through essentially have little to no impact on their emotional or psychological well-being. Mm-hmm. And I feel like mental health and emotional honesty are huge in Star Trek right now. And I think that's really important. And I think that's really important for our culture and for the time that we live in. And it is reflective of the time we live in a lot of ways. So I think it's a good thing. I know it is kind of a hallmark of what is called peak TV right now, to have things like that. but it's different. Like I watched This Is Us with my parents, and I like it, but it's like, man, this just feels like a soap opera because we're just cutting back and forth between emotional scene after emotional scene after emotional scene, and nothing gets resolved, because you're constantly cutting away, and it's kind of like, well, it's just a really, really well-made soap opera. I don't get that feeling with Discovery at all.
Okay.
Discovery feels honest and it feels true to the characters.
Yeah, I've been enjoying all of the emotional availability in the series so far. I felt a lot of warm fuzzies with it, but I saw some people discussing this and I didn't know how to respond to it. And you've always got such well said responses. I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Oh, shucks, sir. Well, the thing that I've learned about fan culture, especially right now, is that people are going to find something to gripe about.
True. This is true.
A friend of mine shared an article about this episode of Discovery, and I started reading it and I quit because I was like, this is so like viciously critical of things that aren't even problems with the episode. And it just made me angry.
Yeah, exactly.
So, anyway, what else do we want to talk about in this episode?
Let's see.
I mean, it is Unification III.
Oh, what I really liked was Saru the diplomat talking to the Vulcan president and kind of trying to ease her back into the Federation. And although there was a little seed that she planted there that, for the audience at least, that maybe the Federation isn't quite what it used to be anymore.
That's true. And I think the crew of the Discovery is there to help change that. But yeah, no, I mean, Saru, that was just Picard level, if not better, diplomacy. I mean, he is, the thing I love about Saru is he is one of the most conscientiously well-spoken captains we have in Star Trek. And just his manner is so graceful, and he just, oh man, that was beautiful. That was incredibly good writing and an incredibly great performance on both sides. Doug and the actor who played the Vulcan president just really played the tension and the shifting perspectives that were going on in that relationship, which I loved, utterly loved. I thought it was fantastic.
It was very good. And so speaking of the Vulcan president, this next little bit will help us segue into our main story as we talk about Ni'Var. And how cool was it? I did not see this coming. Like, even with the name Unification Part 3 or Unification 3, they're talking about Ni'Var, and then they're like, oh yeah, it's Vulcan, but it's the Vulcans and the Romulans living together. It shouldn't have come as a surprise to me, but it kind of blew me away. It was one of those, oh cool, it really happened sort of the moments. It was really neat to see. And then, and not just for them to mention it on screen and then not see it anymore. We actually get to see that little triumvirate of Romulans and Vulcan as they all kind of talked together. That was really cool to see the connection there, or not the connection, but the grouping.
Yeah,
the fruits of Spock's labor.
Right, and this sort of. And I love this too because it's not simple and it's not neat and it's not clean.
Right, like there's riots on Ni'Var. I started to say riots on Vulcan, but I guess it's not Vulcan anymore.
Ni'Var, right?
Yeah.
But it has taken centuries, as Spock predicted, and I love that. I love that because sometimes things in Star Trek are so, especially as you go earlier in Star Trek, they're so focused on. Sort of delivering the moral of the story that things get a little oversimplified. And I love this is where Discovery leans on Deep Space Nine, and where Deep Space Nine has so beautifully changed the face of Star Trek, that we have these long, slow progressions that happen, and things aren't neat and they aren't clean, but they're messy, but they're good. And I loved that panel of people sort of each represented a part of the culture on Ni'Var, and the different perspectives that people had about unification, and the way those cultural ebbs and flows, those cultural lines were intersecting and interweaving, and maybe getting knotted up on the way here and there, and that was just beautiful. And then to see Michael ultimately withdraw her request, as a demonstration, not just a demonstration, but as an honest response that, no, the last thing I want to do is damage the peace of this planet. It's not worth that to me. No way. What you've got here is hard won. My brother founded it, and there is no way I'm getting in the way of his legacy. And I loved that. I thought it was beautiful. And let's talk for just a second here about that, if I may.
Of course.
The fact that Kirsten Beyer wrote this and that she is a novelist, this is great. I love having a Star Trek novelist writing on-screen Star Trek, because this episode in particular is doing on screen what Star Trek novels have been doing for decades, which is to take gaps in Star Trek, take incongruities, things that don't work, or questions we're left with, and resolve them, or at least smooth them out as best they can, and find new rich veins for telling stories within that process. One of my few complaints about Discovery from the beginning has been that I haven't been a big fan of Michael being engrafted into Spock's family. But this episode, for me, felt like Kirsten Beyer doing what a good Star Trek novelist does and saying, okay, this isn't loved, but it is canon. Let's do something good with it. And it's like it gives that whole through line a purpose now. Like Michael is continually throughout the series having her destiny thrust upon her. She's constantly kind of trying to push it away. I mean, Book even talked about her adorable Messiah complex, right? In this episode, which she has, but she still so frequently tries not to be the one who has to do the thing, right? Whether it's the Red Angel or whatever. And in this case, again, she was doing that, and again, her destiny is sort of finding her. And isn't it incredible that of all the people in the world, I think about a maxim that Michael Chabon talked about that they used in Star Trek Picard, which is, if we're going to have a legacy character show up, we don't need to do it willy-nilly. Like that character, it has to be something that only that character could do. It has to be that character. That or we won't bring him in. We bring him in because it has to be that character. Okay? So it's the same thing here, that it has to be Michael who leads Discovery. It has to be Discovery who comes into the 32nd century. It has to be Michael who makes this move right here. With regard to the Federation's relationship with Navarre. Nobody else could have done that. Nobody else could have spoken from the place from which she could speak. And it gives a unique purpose and culmination to that whole story, and a reason for it to be there. That I think speaks to this idea that is so constant in Star Trek of destiny, of calling and destiny, which of course is a very Christian idea. But that we not only have a destiny, but we have an individual destiny, and that destiny is bound up with a communal destiny. And that's something that contemporary Christianity, again, has often lost sight of, because we're very much about individual salvation. We don't think about that communal or that global, that universal salvation. That is the more the focus in earlier Christianity. But I don't know, I thought that was beautiful, and I thought that functioned so well. And even if you end this episode still not loving the Burnham-Spock connection, I think Kirsten Beyer did amazing work to make that relevant and make that work and give that a purpose in this episode.
Agreed. Yeah, no, it was really good. And I like, for me, I was the same way at the start of the first season. It felt shoehorned in just to kind of draw some people in.
Yeah, like to validate the character.
Right,
Like the character's
exactly.
not strong enough on her own.
But
Yeah.
but for me, the relationship between Spock and Burnham, and that she has had as much of an influence on him as he has had on her, that second season really sold me on the relationship for me.
I loved seeing the relationship play out between them. And I felt like that was another sort of brick in the wall, I guess, to sort of help me like it. But I still was pretty much against it. And I'm still not entirely happy about it, I think. I have a general annoyance with family members being grafted on, like Cybok or Sam, Kirk's brother Sam, or whatever,
Wait, Kirk has a brother?
In one episode of the original series, Kirk has a brother.
Huh.
We learn about him and he dies in the same episode. But and so it's the same thing with Cybok, with Spock, and Star Trek V, and all that sort of stuff. I get irritated with that, and I don't know if that's ever going to go away with Michael.
There have been so many characters that have had family members grafted on.
And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time, it irritates me.
Okay, so Kern?
Kern, I love Kern.
Okay.
Can't help it.
I'm trying to think of
But
some
of
others.
course,
Picard has a brother.
Of course, yeah. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it feels, and sometimes it feels forced and sometimes it doesn't. But when it feels forced, anyway, and I can't describe why. I'm not going to psychoanalyze myself right here. But the point is, I might never be fully happy with the Burnham Spock connection, but I feel like Kirsten Beyer gave us a gift in this episode of making that have, the greatest purpose it could have. And what an honor to Leonard and to his legacy. Just like we'll talk in the next segment about Unification I and II honoring Mark Leonard. In the same way, I think this episode honors Leonard Nimoy and honors Spock so much. And it's just beautiful. I love it.
It is. And we're kind of already into our main topic's time, so we might as well get into that.
So
would you care to expand on this?
Yeah, so in Unification I and II, Unification I is very much about... The whole thing is about long, old divisions between the Romulans and the Vulcans, right? And maybe not even old divisions, maybe new divisions. You have in Unification III, you have Burnham, divided against herself, and you have Burnham kind of at odds with Starfleet. And in Unification I and II, you have the fracture between the Vulcans and the Romulans mirrored in the fracture between Sarek and Spock. And there's a sense in which there's tragedy there, because they never really got to work their stuff out. Not really, as far as they got in Star Trek IV, they still never really completely resolved their relationship. And that's sad and that's tragic. But then the way there's a unification, there's a reunification of sorts that happens at the end of Part 2 with Spock's mind meld with Picard, which is one of the most moving moments in Trek history. I really feel like Unification I and II, they're among the best, most classic, most essential Star Trek episodes ever made. Even though a lot of the story is like bound up in like the espionage and the intrigue and sneaking around and all that stuff, it's ultimately about trying to heal fractured relationships, trying to overcome enmity with reconciliation.
You know what this kind of makes me think of? And this just occurred to me like right now, so I apologize if I'm throwing you for a curveball here. But the fracture makes me think of the Jews and the Gentiles, and how you've got the father and son, and then with Unification III, you've kind of got it's like the apostles that have gone on and tried to continue that message of unity.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's good. There are so many, and we've talked about them before. These divisions between groups. Jews and Gentiles are kind of at the core for us as Christians, right? Because that's sort of where, for us who are not Jewish, at least culturally, that's sort of where our people, if you will, stretching back a long way to people who aren't even actually really our people biologically, right? Because we're talking about Gentiles in another part of the world with which we may not have, I don't know, I don't have, you and I don't have any connection that we know of. Who knows?
Who knows? I've not gotten one of those little DNA test things.
Yeah,
Who
right.
knows? I mean,
so, yeah. but we are connected one way or another, even if we're not connected biologically, and especially if we are connected biologically. We as Christians, I think, largely connect with the Gentiles, because, of course, there are a lot of Jewish followers of Jesus as well. But there's that division that's at the root of our faith. The division between Jews and Gentiles. And then there's a division between the Orthodox and the Catholic. Mm-hmm. And then there's a division between the Catholic and the Protestant. And then there's a division between like evangelical and mainline Protestant. And then there's all the splintering that happens after that. Yep. And there's so much division in our history, and there are so many places where we feel we have irreconcilable differences. And so many of those are so profoundly present in our culture today. I talked about in the Advent devotional this week, I talked about how cut off and distant we can feel from one another. That you can feel like you're in another world right across the street. Because even if we're in each other's presence, if we have that privilege in today's in today's situation, that we can even feel philosophically distant from one another. And I think we see that reflected in all three of these episodes. And even just the fact that after this long, I think it's an 80-year friendship between Spock and Pardak, Pardak ultimately betrays Spock, to serve the Romulan Empire. And it's like, even in the face of that, even in the knowledge, Spock has the knowledge that he's probably being played. He has the knowledge that he is probably not going to be successful, at least in this particular run. But he's like, look, if there's opposition, if people are scamming us, we need to know who they are. We need to know how they're doing it, and we need to ferret that out. And we need to find out for sure that that's something we can't trust. And if that's not the case, then, this will be a step in the right direction. So I have to continue with my mission, even if I fail. Mm-hmm. And I love that. And I think that says a lot about the progress of reconciliation and the process of peace. There's a great... I commend it to our listeners. There's a great making of segment, and it's probably available on YouTube on the Star Trek 6 DVD. If you can find the DVD or whatever, it might be on the Blu-ray. I don't know. It's called "The Perils of Peacemaking," and it's a great discussion about peacemaking. I wish I had done a better job discussing this particular aspect in my chapter on Star Trek 6 in the book, but it's basically that. For true reconciliation to happen, for true peacemaking to occur, both sides have to give something up. Both sides have to make concession, have to lose something. And in other words, we each have to give a bit for the other person. And that can be really hard to do. In interpersonal relationships, that can be really hard to do within a church family or between churches. Especially if there's a hot button issue at stake, whatever that hot button issue may be, it can be really hard to overcome those divisions when there's power involved and when there's culture involved. We talked last week about the preservation of culture and the sense that your way of life is dying, anything like that. But I really think we have this example. We have this example in Jesus that again Spock reminds me of Jesus in Unification 1 and 2, particularly in 2, because he only shows up at the end of 1.
Right.
But Spock particularly reminds me of Jesus in this. And from that my analysis of Star Trek 2, 3, and 4, I talk about Spock as a Christ figure. But he also echoes Jesus in other ways, in other parts of Star Trek. And this is one where, Jesus did not give up, did not waver in his mission, did not apologize, did not force anybody, knew that he was heading toward defeat, knew he was heading toward death, and yet pursued peace anyway. Chose to not just make a sacrifice, but be a sacrifice. And I think that is an ultimate example of commitment to peace, that you won't waver from seeking reconciliation, even if the people with whom you're trying to reconcile are trying to kill you. And I'm thinking there again of Mahatma Gandhi. I'm thinking there again of Martin Luther King Jr. and other people who have followed Jesus' example to that degree. And that if people can follow Jesus' example to that degree, on that kind of scale, that maybe you and I can follow Jesus' example on these smaller scales that are demanded of us. Maybe we can see that there's a little less at stake for us than there has been for other people. Doesn't mean it's easy. Mm-hmm. It can still be very, very difficult. But that we can't control other people's actions, but we can choose to be the person who pursues peace. Really at all costs, especially at costs to ourselves, because that's the cost we can control, we can accept, and we can absorb. We can absorb that cost. Anything that means we have to sacrifice, we have the power to make that to accept that cost. We don't necessarily have the power to force other people to accept a cost which they are unwilling to accept. But we can, and that's what Michael does. I'm gonna harken back to Unification III for just a second. That's what Michael does in the episode, is that she is willing to give up everything that she could earn by going through this whole process that she instigated, right? Mm-hmm. Testing the relationship between the Federation and the Vulcans. By doing this, she's willing to give all that up to preserve the peace of Navarre. And it's the same thing with Spock. He's willing to give up whatever he has to push forward the process of reunification for the Romulans and the Vulcans, who are so at odds with each other, just as so many of us are at odds with each other today. And remembering that it's not about necessarily just like right now forcibly changing the mind of the person you're talking to, mm-hmm. but rather constantly doing everything we can to move toward a conciliatory mindset, a peacemaking mindset, to not be the one who causes conflict, but to be the one who tries to dial it back. I was watching something recently on having a conversation with somebody who won't change their opinion, mm-hmm. won't move, won't shift. And one of the things it said to do was crack a joke, completely unrelated to what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Because it gets the other person laughing. I mean, this is just in a single exchange, right? But it gets the other person laughing, and it gets their minds off of the thing that's between you, and it warms them up to you a little bit. Right. And anything you can do to show kindness to other people, that's why Jesus said to love your neighbor. I mean, anything you can do to show kindness to other people will go a long way to carrying forward the cause of Christ, the cause of peace in this world.
For in politics, as in religion, proselytes are rarely won by sword and by fire.
And who said that?
That would be Alexander Hamilton.
Nice! Go Hamilton.
And I'm pretty sure I butchered it a little bit, but
possibly. But that's okay.
The spirit is still there.
Yeah.
So what this kind of makes me think of, speaking along the, looking at peacemaking throughout the Star Trek verse, it really brings to mind the end of the Dominion War.
Mm.
The first time I watched that, I left it very unsatisfied with the way the war ended. Like, I wanted there to be this martial victory, with all the fighting that had been going on. I wanted there to be a big blowout victory and that the bad guys were beaten. But
Yeah.
instead, they ended the war by having Odo cure the changeling, the founder, and merge with her and show her what the Federation was really about. And
Yeah.
as I've aged and I've come to appreciate on a deeper level what Star Trek stands for, I love that ending.
Yeah.
I love the fact that the war came to an end because someone who wasn't even technically a member of the Federation, was just someone who had received the Federation's kindness, could then turn around and show that kindness to someone else and understand that what they really did want was peace.
Yeah. And that I'm so with you right there. And I think that's again, I mean, that's such a it's such a beautiful moment, and it's such a, how do I put this? I want to say it's a Christ-like moment. It's this. Go ahead.
Well, it's another unification moment, where he's trying to bring these two peoples together, and it's another. It's like the sharing of the Spirit. I keep thinking of like Pentecost, where once Jesus has done his thing, now the Holy Spirit comes upon us, and it's our job to go out and be the peacemakers.
Yeah.
And I really feel like Deep Space Nine, the ending of that encapsulates that really well, with Odo going out and being the peacemaker there, saying he has to do this.
Yes. And it's this moment of non-confrontational communication.
Mm-hmm.
And communication seeking understanding from one who has already received from the founders and understands them. Now he comes and brings the understanding that he has of the Federation, and heals not only their sickness, but heals the rift.
Mm-hmm.
And heals the sickness of pride, heals the sickness of fear, heals the sickness of what's the word I'm looking for? Not nationalism, but isolationism, xenophobia.
Mm-hmm.
That's the word, right? Another fear. And yeah, and I think that's so important, and that's so true, and that's so often the case in our lives that. And we've talked about this before, I know, but if we can listen seeking understanding, boy, that makes so much difference. Even if we don't ultimately reconcile all our differences, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe in centuries, as Spock said, and was proven right about Vulcans and Romulans.
It's like that moral arc of the universe we were talking about a couple episodes ago.
Yes. Not just that the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice all on its own because another year ticks by on the calendar, but because we help to bend it. Because as you said, we are the body of Christ. That means we do the work of Christ. Not on our own, not of our own power, not of our own cleverness, but by the Spirit of Jesus, by the Holy Spirit. I have a friend who likes to use the phrase "the Spirit of living Jesus," and I like that. I like that a lot. So I've thought of this a couple of times in recent episodes. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it, and I'll link to it below, or maybe just copy that. Well, I'll link to it below. It's written by Saint Teresa of Avila, and it's very well known, but it's called "Christ Has No Body But Yours." Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks, compassion on this world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses all the world. Yours are the hands, yours are the feet, yours are the eyes, you are his body. Christ has no body now but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks, compassion on this world. Christ has no body on earth but yours. It's attributed to St. Teresa of Avila. Whether it's definitely hers or not, like all the saintly writings, a lot of the saintly writings, we can't be completely certain. But I think that is so beautiful and so true. And that's what being the body of Christ means, is being active and moving in the world, as carrying forward that movement of the Spirit that did start on Pentecost, and that movement of the Spirit that did start with Jesus. So, and we can all be a part of that, all of us.
I'm sitting here nodding my head and realizing that nobody can see me. Because we're podcasters, guys.
we can't hear it rattle, sir.
Right.
Oh man.
And something else that we kind of talked about before we got into the recording session earlier today via text message, we were talking about fitting in versus belonging, right?
Yes.
And that theme...
Quote your wife, because she said this thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was definitely... It came from my wife as we finished up the episode. She kind of turns to me and she's like, there's a difference between fitting in and belonging. Because fitting in, you don't necessarily belong there. You can do what you need to do to fit in somewhere, but when you belong somewhere, you may not necessarily fit in.
Yeah.
And I've been mulling over that over the whole weekend, and with just how much that covers the umbrella that covers over the two species on Nivar now. They don't fit in, but they belong together. Spock didn't fit in on Romulus, but he belonged there, And there's so much else where that extends to. Christ didn't fit in at all, but he belonged there, And there's this... my wife was talking to me some more earlier today about we have this trend, all of us, as Christians, as Americans, as human beings, to avoid awkwardness and uncomfortableness. We want to avoid we want to avoid looking like we don't fit in. And, there's a valid sociological reasoning for that, right? We don't want to be ostracized from the group and miss out on resources and die and not be able to propagate and extend our genes. But there's this overcompensation of not wanting to risk not fitting in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes so much to all this. I mean, you talk about Spock. Spock didn't fit in on the Enterprise either. This is the great thing about Spock, is that he was too Vulcan for the humans, and too human for the Vulcans, right?
Right.
But the humans were the ones who were willing to accept him on his own terms. The Vulcans, the first Kelvin Timeline film portrays this so beautifully. The Vulcans were willing to accept him as long as he pretty much sacrificed who he was,
right,
to play the game, to fit in. And the Federation was more like, you know what, you can still contribute. And I think that's the beauty of diversity, is recognizing that people can contribute because they aren't like everybody else. They have a particular way of being able to contribute that nobody else would have. And that's exceedingly important. And in our growing homogenization of our various people groups, in our churches, in our political circles, even sometimes within families, I think we lose out on this great gift of difference. Gene Roddenberry even talked about this, where he was talking about the destiny of humankind, and the idea that at some point, either as we ascend to a higher plane of evolution or something, or after we die, in a sort of sense of heaven, if you will, that we become one with the all, with the infinite, that we all become one great mind. And he said, but then I feel myself pulling back from that and saying, better we should have the loveliness of disagreeing. And I think that's so great. I think that's so beautiful that there is a loveliness in our difference. And he also talked about not just being willing to accept or tolerate difference, but being able to appreciate and celebrate difference, to celebrate the idea that we are all different. And that is, I think, a true human maturity, and I think that's also a true Christian love. And I'll say even further what we talked about earlier today. I'm gonna bring this in too, that just as you don't have to fit in to belong. So many people feel like they don't fit in, or they aren't worthy of being at God's table. Mm-hmm. They aren't worthy of, we talked about Jews and Gentiles. I think of the Gentile woman that Jesus talked to, who said, I'm not, he said to her, I'm not sent to the dogs, and she said, but even the dogs may eat the crumbs from the master's table. And at that, I think Jesus turns and really metaphorically gives her a seat at the table, and says, you're not a dog, you're a beloved child of God. And it's so easy to feel like, because so many things can make us feel like we have to earn that, or we have to live up to that, or we have to fit into that. But you know what? The love of God is there. The love of God, God's love is bigger and more encompassing and more welcoming than you can even imagine. And God loves you fully, exactly the way you are. And there is a place for you. There is a place for you in the family of God, no matter how much you feel like you don't measure up. And it doesn't matter how different you are. And it doesn't matter how outcast you feel. That you do belong, because everybody belongs around that table. Everybody belongs in God's family. And you are welcome.
Which is exactly what Burnham comes to realize in the end of the episode. After she's had her confession, her moment of confession, she realizes that even though she may not fit in right now, she still belongs.
She can still be herself and be in Starfleet. They two do not have to be separate. Right, to be in Starfleet. She can be the person that she has grown into being and be a member of Starfleet and make Starfleet better because of what she can contribute. So, yeah, I think it's very important for everybody to know that, that they're not alone, and that it's not only okay to be different, it's deeply valuable to be different. Mm-hmm. And if people aren't valuing your difference, God does. Mm-hmm. God does. God didn't make a mistake in making you the way you are.
Right.
So, because God does not do that. And that's something that I think all three of these episodes come around to, is moving past the idea of outsiders and insiders, right? And recognizing that all of us, every one of us can work together and can live together. And can have peace with one another. If that wasn't possible, then, God wouldn't call us to it.
As much as we're talking about unified, what would a unified world church look like? With all of these differences that we have, if we were all in the same church, what would it look like?
But see, I don't think that's the kind of unification that is needed. I don't think that's the kind of unification that we're intended to have. The idea that we're all a part of one institution, or that our faith is sort of homogenized. I think we ought to be able to exist in these little pockets of difference, but recognize ourselves as brothers and sisters, recognize ourselves as sojourners, recognize ourselves as working together toward a common cause.
I guess I'm kind of seeing it now as the Catholic Church, little c. Each of these denominations kind of makes up a different organ in the body.
Yes.
And like one denomination might be the mitochondria, and another denomination is the heart, and another denomination is the voice or the mouth.
Yeah, I love it because I was thinking about with the hands and feet thing. That so often people talk about hands and feet. I love that you go right for the mitochondria.
It's the powerhouse of the cell.
It is. That's great. But no, I mean, you're absolutely right. I do think that unity doesn't have to mean homogenization.
And I think that's something a lot of people are afraid of.
Yes, and they should be. They should be. Anybody or anything that asks us all to be alike is asking us to not be human. And there again, I go back to Roddenberry. I think he had something really true that he was saying there, that we really reach maturity when we can not just tolerate each other's differences but appreciate them. Mm-hmm. That is so important, to honor those differences. We talked before about the myth of colorblindness. Mm-hmm. Or did we? No, I don't think we actually talked about it in the episode.
On this episode, no.
I'm not sure why I left it in the other episode. We talked about it. But the myth of the idea that like, I don't see color, or I don't see race, or whatever, mm-hmm. that's a lie. And if you don't see color, if you don't see race, you don't see the beauty and the diversity of God's good creation. So, yes, we're all different. All of us, even within our races, even within our religions, even within our cultures and subcultures, we are all different. And that's a good thing. But that doesn't prevent us from joining hands in a common cause. That doesn't prevent us from seeking peace with one another. That doesn't prevent us from seeking reconciliation. Those are still vital things that we have to have, but so is our diversity. It's very, very important that it's inclusion, not homogenization.
So we've got a question here from a listener after last week's episode that asks, in the 2009 film, Kirk seems to be rebelling for the sake of rebelling, in marked contrast to his rebellion with a purpose in Star Trek III. Do you feel like this is a failure to really understand Kirk's character, especially since he quote-unquote beats the Kobayashi Maru in the same manner?
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. I get that it can feel that way. There are a couple things going on here. One of which is a deleted scene that I kind of wish hadn't been deleted from the movie. Which shows it's right before Kirk steals his stepdad's car.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He has the scene with his brother, and his brother's saying, you're just, his brother's running away, right? His brother's leaving. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, yeah, you're probably just going to obey every stupid rule like you always do, which is very much in keeping with Kirk's character as it has been established in canon. But because his dad has died, which didn't happen in the original timeline, he has this stepdad who is not good to them, causes his brother to want to leave. And so that inspires Jim, because Jim Kirk always has this rebellious streak in him. Even though he's pretty much a rule follower in Starfleet, we see time and time again that he follows his own way, mm-hmm. right? And Star Trek III is maybe the ultimate example of that. As I said last week, is probably the greatest act of insubordination in Star Trek. But his brother has left, and so when you see him driving down the street in the movie, and he says, "Hey Johnny," that's his brother, who has just left home, and is walking away, and so he's cleaning his stepdad's car because his stepdad has told him that he must do this. Mm-hmm. And he's cleaning his stepdad's car, and the keys fall out from the visor, and that's when he decides to steal the car. because he's thinking about the thing that Johnny said that brought to his attention that this stepdad isn't a good dad, and it makes him want to break out, and it might also be to take the heat off his brother. Honestly, that could also be what he's doing. But that's why he steals the car, and that's why he drives off, and that is where Kirk starts rebelling to rebel. That is where Kirk starts rebelling against authority. That's where he turns a corner as a person. And we see that by the time we see him, when Pike gets to him, and he's picked a fight with Starfleet cadets, or they've picked a fight with him, whatever, in the bar. That's how he gets to that place. And I really wish that had been left in. But the upshot of it is, and I think this does come out in the scene with Pike, is that he hasn't had the guidance of his father. And he blames Starfleet for the loss of his father. And that Kirk is drawn to Starfleet. Naturally, that's kind of his destiny. That's where he belongs. And he's working against his destiny. That's the whole point. And it's Pike who comes in and helps him to see his father's death differently and start to go in the direction that he's been fighting against within himself. So it's very, very true to Kirk's character, but it's Kirk's character under different circumstances, much the way we saw Picard under different circumstances in Tapestry and TNG. Whereas the same person, but this momentous occasion didn't happen, and he never turned that corner in his life, and he went a completely different direction.
Right.
And so, really, that film is all about getting our people not only onto the right ship, but into the right positions. And we can see the gymnastics that have to happen to get them there, but they can't, right? And it's destiny at work. And in fact, Bob and Alex even pitched it that way to JJ when JJ was objecting to the fact that, Kirk just happens to be ejected out of the Enterprise onto the same ice planet where Delta Vega, where Spock Prime is marooned. And he's like, that's ridiculous. How would that happen? And Scotty happens to be there. That's just crazy. And they're like, well, it's destiny. And he's like, oh, okay, well that works. So that's very much it. That's very much, I think, the thematic core of the film. And so yeah, our characters in many ways there are other ways in which other characters are different. But it's because of their circumstances and their backstories. And Kirk's, I think, it's a little bit short shrift without seeing that scene. But the rhythm of the opening of that film is so strong and so good that if it was cut any other way, it wouldn't be as engaging as it is. So I understand why JJ took it out, but It's kind of a shame we missed that part of the story.
It is, yeah.
But even still, I think that element's there. So no, I don't think it's in a bad. I think it's a great observation, though, that he's moving against he's rebelling against his destiny instead of rebelling toward his destiny. I think it's an excellent observation. I'll probably hang on to that in the future. Thank you for that very much. I'll give you 5 cents every time no, but that's kind of the point. That's kind of the point, is that he's going against his destiny, and we get that sorted out and put to rights by the end of the film. So,
and I think that's why he beats the Kobayashi Maru in the same way, is because now he's back on that track that he's supposed to be on.
Well, he's still the same person.
Right.
He still doesn't like to lose.
Yeah.
So there are certain things that aren't going to be any different.
Yeah.
And that's one of them. I don't know if he's back on track until the end of the movie,
that's
really.
fair.
But he's certainly on the trajectory.
Right.
So, yeah. And he's got something to prove, too. Because Pike, Pike gives him that challenge. You can be a captain. You can what is it? You can be an officer in 4 years. And he's like, 4 years? I'll do it in 3.
Right.
Just like, I'm going to do this in the cockiest, most rebellious way possible.
Uh-huh.
I love it. It's such a great film.
All right. Well, thank you for the question. And again,
Yes.
listeners, if you have any questions relating to the episode that you're just now hearing, or the episode of Discovery we just watched, or this episode that you're going to watch, hopefully tomorrow, because you're listening to this as soon as it comes out, please don't hesitate to write into us. We love your questions.
Yes, we do. We appreciate them very much.
We talk a lot about them behind the scenes.
We do. We do. So, all right. So I guess, Tim, why don't you tell us, as though we didn't know, what's coming up for us next week?
Next week, we'll cover the 8th episode of Discovery Season 3 and see what else comes up.
Amazing! What a novel idea.
It's going to be an amazing show.
It is going to be an amazing show. I'm really excited for it. I hope you'll join us for that next time. It's going to be a fantastic show. And in the meantime, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And also, send us your questions. Gospel According to Star Trek on Twitter and Facebook, or gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your question on the show. Tim, do you have anything else to say to the folks at home?
Well, given the nature of this episode, what we've been talking about for the last hour, I have to ask you, Kevin, do you know, what does a Romulan frog use for camouflage?
Oh, dear. I know, but I'm not going to say. I'll let you say it.
A croaking device.
There you go. Which could be another name for a phaser set to kill. But anyway. Oh. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time.
I'm Tim Van Orden.
And I'm Kevin C. Neeson. As Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper.
See you next time.